Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Flexibility versus Control, How to Work Beyond Corporate Firewalls Safely. I'm Teresa Resick, Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are Kevin Parker of Neostech and Aaron McCart of ASG Technologies. ASG Technologies is the underwriter for today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. Before we get started, I just want to offer you a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open or close or resize the different windows. And across the bottom of your screen is a list of all of the widgets that are available to you today. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list that's to the right side of the slide area. And there's also another document and a few other links in there that just a bunch of really good resources for you and just to help you learn more about today's topic. Feel free to ask questions throughout the hour using the Q&A feature, and we will hold these questions until the end where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. But you can also use this feature to comment or ask for technical assistance if you need. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. And I want to introduce our speakers today. Joining us for the Q&A later on in our webinar, Aaron McCart will be joining us then, and he is the Solutions and Product Marketing Manager at ASG Technologies. And Aaron oversees the product positioning, messaging, and analyst relations for ASG's Enterprise Content Management Solutions. But our featured speaker today that I'm very pleased to have with us is Kevin Parker. And Kevin is a Senior Enterprise Information Architect for Neostech. And Neostech is an IT services company that provides information management services and solutions to client agencies within the U.S. federal government. Kevin is a certified information professional and is an accredited AIIM training instructor, and he's also the president of AIIM's National Capital Chapter. His area of expertise includes enterprise information architecture and management, business process management, user experience design, and SharePoint architecture. So with this broad scope of knowledge that Kevin has, I'm going to turn things over to him to begin our talk today. And Kevin, go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Teresa. So today we're going to be talking about the present and future state of working beyond corporate firewalls, why you need a unified strategy, architecture, and governance, ways to plan your technology systems that are cloud first, web first, and mobile first, and then where to turn for help. So let's begin talking about the present state of things. So many enterprises that I've worked with have so many disparate systems, and this is probably a conservative map for many organizations. But the path I've seen historically in a lot of these organizations is every time we have a new business problem or some new thing that we decide we want to do, we'll throw another system at it. We'll throw another application, and that can be one to multiple servers. And those can be managed within business lines, or it could be all under IT, but often it's a hybrid of both. And so that's sort of where we are today in a lot of organizations. You have things like accounting systems and payroll, HR, procurement, all the way down to file shares, intranet, project management, database servers, service desk has their own thing, quality management systems, and then tack on records management, knowledge management, and then, business intelligence. Yeah, let's tack that on. You end up with all these different disparate systems that often can't talk to each other, or if they do, if you do like point-to-point connections between systems, they just become so unmanageable and unreliable, and the whole thing often is just a really rickety structure for a lot of organizations. And from the user standpoint, it's very difficult to keep track of where information should go. So someone's thinking maybe, where did I file those TPS reports? Well, did it go, or does it go in the document repository in the ECM system, or maybe the procurement app, or was it the internet, or X-Drive, or ERP, or is it in the record center? I'll just email it again. And often that's where people even start. They've been through this a couple of times and they decide this isn't a dance that they want to do anymore. So they'll just say, all right, I'm just going to email it to so-and-so, and then we'll figure out where it goes from there. you can see why so often people have a hard time finding information and finding the right version and making sure that progress is going as planned on their different business processes. Now, this and several other slides that we'll have in the presentation come from a very recently published AIIM white paper called Managing Content Beyond Corporate Walls. And that is, the attribution is there, but also a link in the resources, as Teresa mentioned. So on this slide, we're looking at in which of the following locations do users access content in your organization? Overwhelmingly, people say they are still accessing content in corporate file shares and virtual drives, and we're talking about on-prem file shares, network drives, over 80%. And yet, over 70%, almost 3/4, are also accessing documents and information in corporate enterprise content management systems, which tells me that the vast majority of people have documents in both places, and that's the same thing that I see with all of the different clients that I've worked with over the years. There are also a growing number of third-party cloud file shares on top of all of that, which, again, it shows that there are some folks who are using both on-prem and cloud file shares, cloud ECMs, and then corporate records management and other systems. Which of the following devices do employees and field staff in your business unit use to access the following types of information? We'll see that the winner is still Windows PCs, but it's not by a huge margin. And really what I see by this graphic is that there are so many different types of devices, many mobile, tablet, smartphone type devices, plus also Windows and Mac desktop and laptop computers. There are a lot of different devices, and the picture that I get is we really need to be delivering information to a wide range of devices much more easily. Now, finding ways to work around corporate firewalls is nothing new, and throughout this webinar, I'm not talking about anybody with any ill intent here that people are, trying to hack corporate information. That's a subject for other webinars and definitely an important topic. But we're just talking about people here trying to do their job. And so you have all these disparate on-prem systems here on the left, and traditionally we have a VPN, a virtual private network, which people can use their laptops or their even mobile devices in many cases to VPN into the corporate systems through the firewall and try to access their information. Now, they could be using their device natively, or it could be using some type of like virtual desktop on a server, or actually remote desktoping in to their machine. Now, that experience is designed for laptops and desktops, not really for mobile devices. So you still have that issue of it wasn't designed for people to be very mobile or to have a variety of devices. The other option is often people will just email it to themselves. Now, if corporate email may be available beyond the firewall, then people can at least keep it within the corporate email system. But oftentimes people will say, you know what, I need to work on this at home. I'm just going to email it to my personal account. Sometimes, organizations, especially in the government, with the clients that I work with, will lock that down as much as possible to try to filter out emails going in and out. But it's still difficult, and by that time you've already lost a lot of control. So your ability to control with using cloud apps would be official cloud apps there in the middle of the slide, where you may have like an enterprise file sync and share type cloud drive that people can use, some type of line of business app or cloud email, maybe even enterprise social. People can still work, and they can work outside the firewall, but you still got this issue of it's largely an experience that's designed for the desktop, and you still have all these disparate systems. So you still have some control, but the chaos is still there from the user's perspective. If you don't offer them those options, I've seen a lot of organizations with what we call shadow IT, these cloud apps that are rogue out there that aren't controlled by your information technology department. And in fact, one in the private sector where I was a consultant for quite a while, I saw one very large corporation had about 10 subsidiary companies, and one of the subsidiaries, the entire organization had gone to a cloud vendor that they were doing themselves. So it was still sort of corporate, but none of the IT people even knew it existed until we discovered it one day. So we lost control. They were trying to get flexibility, and yet those apps still didn't meet their needs. So there was still a lot of problems there. And if you've got people doing personal cloud and email type things, then you've really lost control at that point of your information. So let's talk about where things are headed. The workforce that we see around us in many organizations the people are increasingly distributed. They're working at different sites. They're mobile. They want to be able to work on mobile devices, or they need to because they're in a field somewhere and they're doing point of sale type things. And also people are expecting more and more telework options. So with that in mind, what would you say are the 3 biggest drivers for moving content to the cloud in your organization? Back to the white paper. And overwhelmingly, the biggest driver is enabling anytime, anywhere, any device access for content. And that's consistent with what I've seen in my work. That's consistent with a lot of the other subject matter experts that I talk to in our industry. People need to be able to access the content anytime, anywhere, any device. There are other drivers here, but you can see they all fall a very far second to that very top driver. How do you see your organization changing its content management practices within the next 5 years? You start there at 12 o'clock and rotate clockwise there. We see, moving completely to a hosted private cloud. That's where you're doing things internal, or it can be hosted even at a co-location facility, but you really control that. About 14%. Moving everything to an internal cloud platform is 11%, where it's all definitely internal and controlled. But the vast majority there, 64%, say implementing a hybrid cloud and on-premise platform. So that you have some things out in a cloud infrastructure and then some things internal. And some say they're not going to be using cloud in the near future, and then some not sure. So let's talk about some tips for moving forward with this idea of a lot of people are mobile, distributed, some need to work from home, and that we're looking at infrastructure from both cloud and internal hybrid type environment. First, and I tell this on every topic that I discuss that has anything to do with information management, you should start with the information strategy. Information strategy defines what you plan to do with information and why. It begins with an honest information maturity assessment, which then you can use to measure progress as you go forward, but also upfront it helps identify the areas that you really need to work on. It includes a blueprint of what information management should look like in the organization and a roadmap of how you get to that future state. It also includes critical success factors for showing progressive improvements. Nothing that I'm describing today is, at least in my experience, typically done as an all-in-one big bang approach because often those fail. They're just too complex. But you still have to plan a strategy up front, and then you can do some things iteratively over time and make some real improvements that can be measured and then reported up, and everybody's a lot happier. So from information strategy, we move to information architecture, which defines the structures and channels for your data, content, knowledge, records, and analytics in support of the strategy. It includes designing schemes for organizing, labeling, navigating, and searching your information, and it takes into account your business processes, your organization goals, like your mission statement and your vision, and regulatory requirements and other AIIM-related needs. Then from strategy and architecture, we talk about information governance. Now, many times I hear information governance cited, and really what they're describing is records management in the 21st century. It's a lot bigger than that. It's not just about retention. It's about getting your people and your systems to use information in the ways that you intend it to use. It's really born out of the quality management movement. And information governance should support your strategy and architecture by getting the right information to the right people at the right time to do the right things, which could mean mobile and all those other things we've discussed. It defines the rules and the roles for protecting information and ensuring its proper use. And it seeks to protect that sensitive information and preserve knowledge and records while mitigating information risks. That's a lot of things that need to get done, but that's why it's important to do these things upfront and ongoing. Now, first tip here beyond the strategy, architecture, and governance, and that is really to design your infrastructure for the cloud first. So what I when we talk about cloud, there's a few different options. We're really going to focus just today on software as a service, and that's where you have applications that are actually hosted out there in the cloud. There's something that you often subscribe to, and your folks can use it, and it's already accessible by mobile and off-site devices because it's not behind your firewall. It's out there in the cloud. The software as a service model really is taking away a lot of the headaches of not only the physical architecture and technology bits and things that you have to work on. You don't have the infrastructure to work with, but also don't have the application things to maintain. And so there are certified people, and we're talking about reputable cloud vendors here, that have their certified people on staff for security, for patches, for updates, the downtime management and that type of thing, and then disaster recovery. All those things, those are headaches that maybe your IT staff don't have to deal with as much if things are software as a service. Now, infrastructure as a service is still technically cloud. That's just using someone else's infrastructure, but you're basically managing virtual machines in many cases out there, databases and things in their cloud, but you still have to manage, software updates and patches and that type of thing. But it's still better than having to host a bunch of and own a bunch of expensive computers that go out of date quickly on your own infrastructure internally. So we look at internal private cloud versus external public cloud, and then that hybrid cloud. So really, so many organizations need to maintain some control. Sometimes it's just it's them thinking that they need to maintain the control, but then there are also regulation reasons why some things like records management and very sensitive information needs to be stored on premises. Then you can still take advantage of the cloud and then have systems that connect back and forth. It should be seamless to the user, but it's really that hybrid cloud is the reality for some time to come for many organizations. Design applications for the web first. Now, I don't mean that all applications have to be web applications, but when you do design a new application or you are acquiring somebody else's applications, some software vendor that supplies these types of ECM and other tools, if they are web accessible, then they're already more likely, at least if you're making it yourself, and then you can test this with others, more likely to be compatible with all kinds of devices. So all modern network devices can read web pages and can read web apps that are designed for that, for interface on different devices. They can have standardized data services so that they can even connect with legacy applications and other things out there, or just non-web apps, and then surface that data through a web-like interface to users. It's easier to develop and maintain these. I did it for years before I got into government consulting. I actually built and maintained web applications, and that made it easier for me to let my clients get this stuff on any device, even before we were using terms like cloud and mobile and whatnot. Easier to use for integrating other applications, as I mentioned, legacy apps and then repositories. It's also much simpler to develop and maintain than a very platform-specific technology that maybe causes you to be locked into a certain vendor or whatnot. And especially even with the news this week with a lot of changes in the ECM landscape, vendor lock-in can be a problem. But if you have apps that are, at least the interface to the users is something that can connect to a lot of different apps on the back end, they don't need to know who all the vendors are. They just need to access their information. And so designing things that are for web first lets you have some flexibility there. Designing user experience for mobile first. Now, again, not everybody's going to be using a mobile app, but if you start with a mobile experience and then you can progressively enhance things through responsive design or other techniques to make it the experience a bit different on the desktop if you need to. But I generally try to keep it as similar as possible because users don't need to think jumping between different devices. They just need to access the information and do their jobs. Those simple interfaces can work on both desktop and mobile. You're starting to see that more and more. It's not a fad. It's really the right way to go. I've been doing that for a long time myself. It provides a better experience for accessibility and usability on all devices through standardized interfaces. Now, it really is difficult when you have all these disparate apps to try to make things like, for instance, in the government, we have Section 508 compliance for accessibility, but really those same standards should apply to everybody. At least they should be used by everyone to make things accessible for people with varying degrees of ability, varying, vision and auditory and different disabilities that they may have. If you make things simpler and design it from the beginning to be mobile and accessible and usable, it's really going to make every part of the maintenance and development cycle a lot simpler and cheaper in the long run. It's much simpler to develop and maintain these types of apps this way, as opposed to, okay, now we need a mobile version, and now we need a on-prem version, and we need this and we need that. Start simple and go mobile first, and then, like I said, progressively enhance as you go. Provide a single entry point. So there are a lot of organizations that are going to just a single platform, and they're finding that that's easier. If they could have one vendor provide all the pieces that they need for their entire information management lifecycle and business process management, that can work, and it certainly can provide a single entry point. But even beyond that, for the sake of the users, a single entry point, even with multiple disparate apps in the back end, is really important. They don't, again, really care what the IT infrastructure looks like. They care about what their interface looks like and how they're able to do their job. So either or, as long as it's a single entry point or as close to one as possible. Your portal can be a web interface to all of your enterprise information. And now I'm using portal as a sense of getting into your information either from inside or outside. A lot of times when we talk in these terms, words can have different meanings for different folks. I'm talking about portal as an entry point to all of your information. It certainly can be your intranet. If your intranet homepage, if all of your apps are web apps, or at least the interfaces to them are web apps, then it's really simple to, at the very least, provide a URL on a map of all of your systems to users. If that's as complicated as you can get, that's a great way to start. But then trying to move to a single platform or at least interface is really good for users. And it helps reduce your silos because they don't need to worry about where do they put stuff. They're not putting it on, the internal network drives and the ECM system and the cloud drive and email, because that's when they got frustrated, they emailed it. You reduce the rot, that's the redundant, obsolete, and trivial information, because they only need to put it in one place. And guess what? They can find it a lot easier as well. So working better within and beyond the firewall shows, again, even if you have all these disparate systems, providing that single entry point to all devices is going to make the user experience a whole lot better. Even better if you can simplify your architecture and have much fewer systems, and even to the point of if you're small enough or agile enough organization to be able to go on one platform is one way to go. Plus, using official cloud apps, just realize that the more apps you add without reducing the overall complexity, the more complex you're making things. That's why I try to boil things down to this single entry point or single platform for devices. So let's talk about user adoption for a moment. User adoption is a very critical success factor to any information management system initiative. You can have the best system on the planet, and if users don't use it, then it's a failure no matter what other measures you're using, because the whole goal is to get them to put the information in to do their jobs, and then the information is there for you to control. So here in context, we see, again, strategy. What are you trying to accomplish, and what are the critical success factors? Always start with that. Moving to architecture. How do we organize and structure things? To governance. How do we get people to use it in the ways that we intend? Then implementation, how do we build it out and get users started? This is all part of one large mapped effort, it should be. And then operation, ongoing operation and maintenance, how do we support users and drive adoption? And that still takes into account their security, privacy, management of the solutions, business continuity and retention, and then compliance and et cetera. We haven't even touched on business continuity and disaster recovery here, but there are so many benefits to having this more simplified architecture in terms of people being able to work, because if there's a disaster, or like here in the Washington, D.C. area, we've had some major snowstorms over the last few years where it's kept people home for days. But government can continue operations if people are able to telework. And so having the solution accessible beyond the corporate firewall, our services can continue to operate even though we aren't able to get physically on site. So there are just a lot of benefits for the user to be able to work in and out of the corporate firewall. Let's just touch briefly here on technology capabilities for mobile workers. So these are some of the things. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but these are some of the things that people tend to use that I see with clients that I've worked with, and then also my own company that I work with, Neostech. So a lot of times we'll use things like web-based content and business process management applications, whether it's some type of cloud ECM system or an internal one that we can access internal or externally. But having that system that is often with an intranet to be able to access that information on any device is really helpful, because often, especially, I'm just talking personally for me for a moment as a worker, I have multiple client sites. I have multiple other places that I have to be at, conferences and whatnot. I'm actually giving this webinar from my house today, which is fantastic because I'm able to connect mobily, and we're able to conference here beyond a firewall somewhere, and you're able to connect from wherever you are. This is the kind of enabling technology we're talking about here. With enterprise file sync and share systems, workers can have at least a central place to store documents and files that can be synced on their computers, and then it's also controlled somewhere, whether it's a cloud one or an on-prem one. Although, even though I see a lot of push for enterprise file sync and share these days, just keep in mind, though, that's a really document-centric approach. And if you're moving away from documents as containers to just information in general, that's not the only thing that you need in order to enable ECM. So moving on to email, messaging, and conferencing. Email's been around a long time. I can't stand using email for project management except where it makes sense. So there are some times where I'm working with people, again, like this webinar, where we have folks from different organizations coming together. Email still works pretty well for that. But internally for project management, it'd be really great to have another system, and that's sometimes we enable that as long as it's, again, one entry point to get into that. But things like messaging, conferencing, to be able to actually communicate, this is what this is about, is communication. You still need workers that are beyond the corporate firewall to be able to communicate on a regular basis, to be able to reach each other and to actually interact in order to do their jobs. So don't forget the connection, the communication piece of that. Enterprise social and collaboration tools can be really helpful, and those are often web-based or at least app-based type of thing. And then still remember, you need to provide search that goes across all these things, and then consider how you capture information. So a lot of organizations need mobile or distributed capture to be able to get information into their processes faster. These are all things to consider when you're looking at how to enable your mobile workers. Then tech capabilities for securing information. We could do whole webinars, in fact, a whole series of webinars on each of these things, but just wanted to touch on them because anytime we talk about working beyond firewalls, we still need to talk about security. So directory services and access management to information, that's still very important, whether you're using Active Directory or some other type of LDAP or directory services from whatever platforms that you're on. You need a way to authenticate people, and that's, especially with on-prem and cloud hybrid, that's a very important consideration to make sure that you get it right. Encryption is one of the least understood topics, which is really baffling to me as an information technology professional, why more people don't understand it, but you can't do this securely without some form of encryption. And so having things like information rights management in place so that only the right people can access the information. If it happens to leave your servers or if it leaves your cloud system, will it still be accessible by someone who isn't authenticated? Those are very important considerations. And then mobile device management, where you are keeping mobile devices updated so that you can stave off security threats, but also making sure that you can remote wipe and things like that so that mobile devices don't become a security problem for your organization. The one issue I would point out here, though, is any of these things that you tack on, any of the things we've talked about in this webinar, like records management or mobile device management or, oh, cloud, we need this cloud app. If you tack it on as an extra to what you're already doing, you're just increasing the chaos. So try to think about these in terms of completely reworking your IT infrastructure over time. So there are some common objections. I've just put a couple up here to think about. I'll hear from people, you know, we can't worry about flexibility, only control. The reality is, if you don't offer flexibility to workers, you will lose control. They will find a way around. And again, we're not talking about nefarious intent here. We're talking about people just trying to do their jobs. It could even be that you've put all the controls in place on your mobile devices and everything, and people just need some information. They can take a picture with their phone on their screen. I mean, there are ways to get around things if you don't provide them the right flexibility to do it the way that at least you have more control over the information. Another objection I hear is moving to a single platform or even a single entry point. That's too big of an effort. That's the boil the ocean or all these other things, that cliches that we like to use about that. But really, how big is the effort for continuing to manage your disparate systems while losing control and productivity with what you have today? It's like the thing that I say a lot to audiences about, you know, if you don't have time and money and effort to do this right today, how and when will you have enough to do it over? You're going to lose control unless you offer that flexibility. That's the bottom line here. So just very quickly in summary, we're talking about designing for flexibility and control. That really requires developing that unified strategy, architecture, and governance, and really simplify that architecture the best that you can. Then design your infrastructure for the cloud first, and then know that you're going to go toward hybrid in many cases. Design applications for the web first, and provide user experience that is designed for mobile first. And then provide that single entry point. Really makes things a lot simpler for everybody involved. So where do you turn for help? This is a daunting task. It seems like one, but fear not. There are many good resources here to turn to. I would say very importantly, it is to look for information strategy and management consultants, certified information professionals. This is my plug for the CIP. I'm a certified information professional. We have many that have gained that certification, and the whole point of it is to be able to understand all these different information management domains and how they cut across each other, and really how do you enable organizations to do their work better with information. That's what the CIP is about, in my view. And so look for certified information professionals. Also look for technology vendors who really understand information management, cloud and mobile. If someone just got into cloud last month, maybe let them mature a little while. If they're doing it and they've been doing it for a while, then and that you can tell that their trajectory is to help you with cloud and mobile, they're probably a vendor that you can go with. And then AIM research, training, and community, and so many resources that AIM has to offer. Take advantage of those. You will learn. This webinar is a great example, and this is an opportunity to ask us questions even, which we're going to have in just a moment, a Q&A. But the conversation doesn't have to stop during this webinar. There are many of us in the community who engage on a regular basis on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and many other channels. So turn for help to people who know what they're doing, and let's work together and try to make this thing better for your organization. That's the main presentation for me. As I mentioned, I work for Neostech here in the United States government area, Washington, D.C., primarily working with federal agencies. There's my contact information. I'll probably see you at an event sometime if you go to AIM events, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I will now turn it over back to Teresa and ASG Technologies.
Thank you, Kevin. We've been listening to Kevin Parker of Neostech, and just want to mention, I mentioned this at the beginning, that the ASG Technologies has underwritten this webinar today, and just wanted to put their URL up on the screen for you. They are a valuable resource, and there is also a link in the resources list to the right of the slide area. If you click on any of those links in that resource area, it'll open in a new browser tab for you, and you can check it out after the webinar. But please check out what ASG does have to offer. They are an excellent resource. And we will be, Aaron McCart from ASG is going to be joining us for the Q&A in just a moment here. But I also wanted to mention, Kevin had mentioned a research paper that AIIM has just completed. We just published it, and the stats and the charts that he was using in his presentation came from this report. So to download a full copy of that report, just go to, there is a link in the resource section, and if you're listening to this after the live webinar, just clicking on the slide here or going to the AIIM website, and you'll be able to access this in the AIIM research section of our site. And it's a very comprehensive, really useful report, so even more information than what Kevin had shared there. So please avail yourselves to that resource. And so now I do just want to take some questions from the audience, and as I did say, Aaron McCart from ASG is going to be joining us. Aaron, are you there right now?
Yes, I am.
Good, good. Well, I'm going to jump right into a couple of the questions that have come in already, and please feel free to continue to submit your questions. We'll do our best to get to all of these in here. And one of the questions that came in, and this is it struck me as being something that when the concept of cloud and managing your information in the cloud or in a hybrid environment was a newer experience. Who owns the information that's in the cloud? It's your information, you're putting it in there, but I still think it's worth just briefly touching on this again because there are so many facets involved, and especially when you're looking at your existing infrastructure, and as Kevin mentioned, so many different rogue type of systems that people can employ in their organization without IT knowing. Aaron, can you just talk a little bit about who would own that information that is in a cloud or hybrid environment?
It really will depend on the type of cloud environment you go with and the cloud provider you're using. But most typically, you own that information that you have in the cloud. That is the illness and burden put upon the organization to make sure that they continue to own it, and where they need to, then be able to have that on-premise for regulatory compliance.
Okay. Another question that's come in here. See here, Kevin, someone's referencing something that you had talked about in your presentation, because you spoke of information strategy when you were talking about that. You were mentioning that starting somewhere with that iterative approach for a quick win was a good way to think of your information strategy. Would that kind of approach also apply for information governance if you don't already have a governance plan in place? Just as a way to get that incorporated into the overall planning?
Yes, and I'll go as far as to say that if you haven't taken the time to put out an information strategy, then any information governance effort is going to actually miss the mark on a lot of things because you don't know what you're aiming at. That information strategy is as simple as, okay, this is what we do as an organization, as a business or a government entity or whatever it is that we do. These are our goals. These are our business processes, and these are the types of information that we need to manage. And here are our obligations in terms of how we control that information. Governance needs to step in from there and say, okay, now how are we going to ensure that those are the things that we are doing and using the information in those ways? Doing information governance as a standalone thing, I've never seen successful other than unless you're defining it as we need to be able to maintain records for X number of years for whatever. Even that, if you don't know what your important records are, then you need to step back to strategy. That's really the bottom line.
Okay. That sort of addresses this other question that came in where you talk bringing the strategy, architecture, and governance all together because they're all so important and intertwined. But in the planning efforts, touching on all of those, I believe you did answer that question there as well. Let's see here. bear with me as I have a few of the questions that are coming in here. Someone's saying that they have an on-prem enterprise ECM suite that also has the web client for the purposes of document recall. And this is a very specific type of question, but is VPN the best way to make that web client available for remote users, or what other types of options are there other than VPN? Kevin, do you want to offer some suggestions here? Or
okay. I definitely can.
Either one.
I'll turn it over to the two of you to also address if you want. But I mean, VPN is often the only way to get through a firewall securely, unless you open up certain ports for things. But I mean, it's one of the options, but it really depends on that technology. Like, I would talk to the vendors and say, you know, what is the preferred method for actually accessing this securely? Do we need to offer VPN, or if this is a web client, is this something where we also need to have something exposed through the firewall as opposed to VPN? But then, you know, you also need to be careful what you open up in the firewall. I mean, we have firewalls for a reason, because we don't want people just coming in and intruding our networks and doing whatever it is that they want to. So, yeah, definitely look at what the best practices are for that particular ECM suite. And with their web client, if it's some other thing that you're enabling, that's a conversation that you just need to have internally, I think, with the IT department there.
And Aaron, any additional thoughts from you? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just add, you also need to look at the value of your information, the type of information that you are wanting to share. How important it is to you and the organization to keep it private amongst yourselves versus allowing it to be available in the public domain. Once you're able to identify that level of security you need to keep around that information, then the means of accessing it outside the firewall can be determined. As simple as just putting information up for employee use on a web portal, and you just have to do a single sign-on for that, or do you need to do a VPN? So just look at the value of that information. How important is it to keep it secure and out of other people's hands?
Very good approach. Thank you. Here, Aaron, I wanted to ask if Kevin had mentioned a few times in his presentation with his experience in working with clients, past and present, for tackling a project like this. It's more than just a project; it's a lifestyle for the organization. But just wanted to allow you the opportunity to share some of how some of your customers have been approaching these efforts with the strategy and architecture and governance, and how your teams have been helping them and helping them achieve these wins. Can you just go and share some of your experiences?
Sure. So a lot of our clients have been in existence for a long period of time, 50, 100 years. So they have numerous types of application systems, platforms on which they operate on, and it's all very disparate. And what we're starting to see with the advent of the cloud coming back is now they're looking at how to gain control over all those disparate systems, how to be able to create a single sign-on and be able to access the information from a single place. So what we started doing and working with them on that is, let's look at what are the vendors they want to keep, that they must keep, if it's an ERP vendor, for example, or ECM vendor, or accounting practice, or what have you, and then identify what information that they need to be able to put into a single repository or manage in place where it currently resides. And a lot of times we find that they're able to really consolidate their vendors and then consolidate the information into a cloud-based system, but also into a on-premise-based system, and be able to connect the 2 points together. And now they're starting to really reduce the amount of vendors and the amount of systems that they're having to access that information, and then be able to provide that information out to their customers or to their employees and make it a multiple first.
And Kevin, just your opportunity to share a little bit more specifically with client experiences. Anything that you want to add to that or different strategies or tips or ideas for this?
I will definitely echo what was just said, in that oftentimes you can't just get rid of all the existing systems because there are significant investments in those systems. Some of them actually work pretty well, but there are so many different systems, and the problem is if we continue to throw a new system at every problem, you really increase that complexity. You need a roadmap internally for your organization to say, okay, here are the systems that we want to keep. Here are the systems that we can sunset. We can get rid of those at some point and consolidate onto a simpler architecture with fewer systems. And if you can do something like what was just mentioned about having a single repository, a lot of applications don't have to be the repository for the information, but they may just handle the business process side of it. And so those can then, and we're seeing it with a couple of our clients as well, where we may have like a customer relationship management application, but there's a different ECM application that is really that single place of storing all that information, and then all the other apps now, new ones, are going to start using that same underlying ECM repository, so that you really simplify where the information is and then how to go back and access it later. It can be accessed outside of the business process, and that can make things a lot simpler, I think. But simplifying and getting rid of systems as much as possible, I think that's really the right way to go there.
Thank you. Thank you. I do just want to mention a couple other things here. In October, AIIM is going to be hosting a free one-day seminar about improving your paper-driven processes. So if you're going to be in Washington, D.C., New York City, or Toronto, Ontario on any of these days in October, we're going to be one day in each of those cities, just encourage you to register and to stop by for this free seminar. It's a like a 3/4 day, but it's a free seminar intended to be for about the whole day. So if you go to AIIM.org/seminars, you can learn more in detail about the agenda and what all activities are going to be taking place. And these seminars have always been very helpful and very useful in the past, so something I encourage you to check out. And also just wanted to remind you again that in the resources area off to the right side of the slides, you can download a copy of the white paper we discussed today, download a copy of the slides, and get some links to a few other resources that are in there for you. And just wanted to mention that we have recorded this webinar, and it will be available in the next day or two at AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page. And so you'll be able to come back and listen to it again then, or invite your colleagues to listen to it. Also, when this webinar is over, a brief survey is going to open up on your desktop, and I greatly value your feedback and would like to hear from you. So in the survey, you can also offer comments and suggest future topics for us to cover. So we'd greatly appreciate it if you take a few moments to answer the questions that are in there for us. Very much want to thank our underwriter of our webinar today, ASG Technologies. Without the support from our solution providers, AIIM wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs like our webinars. So thank you, ASG, for your contribution. And as we do bring our webinar to a close, I want to ask each of our speakers for their closing thoughts or a key takeaway from the discussion today. And I would like to start with Aaron McCart of ASG Technologies. Some of your closing thoughts today.
My closing thought really comes down to, people want simple and easy access to corporate information, regardless of where they are, where they're located, what time of day it is. And as Kevin mentioned, if you don't give them that ability to access the information easily and quickly, they're going to have workarounds, and they're going to undermine the current IT systems that are in place. Also, when looking at trying to update your IT system, don't do a big bang approach. Start small, start incremental, really think about, okay, what can we move to the cloud? What can we have in the cloud environment? And then how can we move information to make it easy and accessible to everybody else? Like Kevin said, you have to be flexible. You have to provide that flexibility. Otherwise, your systems will be undermined by your own employees. So that was my biggest takeaway.
Thanks, Aaron. And Kevin Parker of Neostech, your closing thoughts today.
So I definitely echo that the big bang approach is often very much a failure in many places where it's tried. So doing an iterative, doing things as you can, trying to improve the most important processes first and so on is the way to go. but always still start with that foundation of that strategy, architecture, and governance, so that you're making sure that the projects you do take on are the right ones, right? So it keeps you focused, and it helps you to make sure that you're bringing in the right vendors, that you're bringing in the right solution technology integrators and that sort of thing, sort of resource, and make sure that you're actually following down the path. That is done constantly. That strategy, architecture, and governance can continually be updated, but it will drive all of your smaller projects, which are these individual technology projects. And as we've said throughout the webinar, people will take the path of least resistance when it comes to working with information. If you provide that path for them, then you have much more control over that information from end to end.
Thank you, Kevin. That is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining us. And for AIIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you next time. And have a great afternoon.